Right. I would like to call to order the meeting of the City of Monona San Damiano Project Steering Committee of Tuesday, July 18th, 2023. Jake, you have the roll call. I'm anticipating Nancy Moore is in Maine, and I'm anticipating she'll join us via Zoom. So is there, Jake sent out the June minutes earlier today, I think. Is there a motion to approve those?
I move we approve them.
There's a second?
Second.
All in favor say, or any corrections or additions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Just
Minutes are
for the
approved.
record for the committee, if you do want to go back and watch the YouTube meetings, they're all on Monona Community Media, and then in the minutes, there's a link now as well.
Oh.
That'll start showing up on all of our minutes.
That's a good idea. Okay, so first we've got, doesn't look like we have any appearances. Under unfinished business, review draft report of existing conditions and concept sections. This was included in the packet Jake sent. I think it was with the meeting invite. And I just want to go over this pretty quickly because a lot of it is things we've already seen. I think there's a lot that still needs to be filled in, but Dan, are you looking, I don't want to go through page by page, but are you looking more for thoughts about the general structure?
Yeah, you can take your time and review it. We're just going to keep filling it in as we go.
Okay,
And we'll do the same thing with sections coming up, like the concepting section. We'll send them to Jake and then he can distribute them and then take your time to review them and give us comments and same with the general layout as well. If
okay,
there's something that you like or don't like about the look of it, we still got some things to find on that part too. But take your time. There's no hurry.
well, I don't know if any, hey, Tony,
Yes.
I don't know if anybody has, Mary Lee, did you have something, Tony?
No.
Okay,
I have just one comment. I think it's on the front cover. It's just an image of the property. I feel like maybe we don't want to include the other properties surrounding it.
Okay.
Because it
So
shows
focus
people's
just on the part.
backyards.
Yeah.
And of other people.
We've got plenty of drone photos, so we can.
Maybe it's on, there's a set
There's a-
photo of that shows like a bunch of backyards.
Okay.
Yeah.
looks very green.
It was green that day, even the water wasn't green.
Oh, and I think you need to update the names of the committee members, because
Okay.
Kelly Slack and Lorraine Gage are still listed there.
Yeah, are they?
Yeah, with
Okay.
Tony and Jesse have took their spots a while ago. Oh, looks like Nancy's here.
And I'm Marile. So, yeah, okay, thank you.
Mary, you want to introduce Neil?
I'm sorry, yeah.
No, you're fine.
I know we introduced Neil. This is Neil Stick Schulte. He is our new city administrator. Do we want to just go around the table and introduce ourselves, Jake?
Jake, Matt.
Doug Wood, Alder,
President, how are you, sir?
And I'm Marilee Gorman.
and Dan Williams.
Dan, how are you?
Tony Gomez Phillips, nice to meet you.
You too, Tony.
Andy Kitzler.
Nice to meet you.
Wes Black.
Wes.
Rebecca Holmquist.
Rebecca.
And you know me.
Yes, I do.
We've got a few people up here.
Any folks up here, that's right. Alder Moore, I know her, saw her last night too.
Welcome aboard again.
Thank you.
And Kyla. And
Yeah,
Jesse.
Kyla here. Hi, thank you in person.
Yeah, and I'm Jesse Starr. I'm the associate principal at Winnequa Elementary School in Monona and representing the district.
Are you at Winnequa now, or are you in Rockford?
I'm in Rockford. We got kicked out of the offices as they're doing some summer cleaning, so yeah, I'm work from home. Yeah.
That's okay, yeah. And Dan Schmidt is the other,
Dan Schmidt with MSA. So
yeah.
Perfect. Right. Well, nice meeting everybody.
Yeah. So you're just saying, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on the review of the draft report. Dan has said they're going to just keep on adding to it and we should just send them comments. As we think we want to. There's still a lot to be filled in. If anybody has just anything in general they'd like to say about the structure, anything. I'll give you a couple minutes here, but otherwise we'd like to move on to the next section of the agenda. So does anybody have anything? I don't think so. Okay. next thing then, under draft master plan development discussion, the two kind of big items we're gonna talk about today. Preferred concept and or concept elements to include. I'm thinking it would be nice if maybe we could narrow down a couple of the bigger things. Specifically the facility. Do we want to narrow it to the house or a four-season facility and drop the small shelters, or do you want to keep the small, whatever. And maybe talk about the parking and then get into, a couple of other things after that. So if anybody have any thoughts about I think we should certainly keep two facilities and to still keep considering, but how do people feel about the small shelters seems kind of problematic because we aren't going to be able to do any kind of revenue generating activities there really. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
I think also going through all the questions, and I'm worried that this small shelter won't meet now, let alone in the future of Monona, so.
Yeah.
Good point. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just, Mayor, I would concur that I think, I think at the end of the day, we need to think about the fact that we're committed to this being financially sustainable. Number one, and number two, that the residents in the community engagement, residents have clearly said, in addition to that, in addition to many residents saying they want it to be financially sustainable, they've also said they want it to be primarily natural and serene. And I think really the only two options that meet those two fundamental things are the ones that have facilities on them, because it's just not a four-season thing. And as you just mentioned, without a facility, it's not as valuable to as a four-season, with four-season opportunities, or as valuable to our potential community partners for its use or for revenue generation.
So you're saying not just seasonal shelter?
Yeah, no, not the seasonal shelter. I also think that, I think we just have to be realistic from a financial standpoint with just a seasonal shelter that leaves the revenue generation extremely small. And there still would be, expenses involved. Jake has already indicated as one example, even if we left it blank, he needs a full-time staff person just to take care of it. And so to say that somehow it's not going to cost us anything if we build the shelter, even the shelter would cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars and bathrooms.
Right.
Not to mention a staff person. So I think we need to think about revenue generation, be smart about that, and the potential that the property has.
Yep.
And I also think that we have that type of shelter in many of our parks. That's a need that's already being met in Monona, where the other is a real need for a four-season.
Yeah.
Is a need in Monona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not duplicating services.
Right. Does anyone else have anything to say about that? I think, can we take a motion on this?
Sure.
We don't really have say possible decision or whatever here.
Are there other
Anybody?
elements that we want to discuss? Is this the part where
I don't know if we want to just take one by one and vote on them each, or. And then we can just say that's done.
we move to abandon shelter?
It's there a second. Which is concept B in terms of the.
Pursue, we could frame it more positively. Move to pursue either house rehabilitation or a four-season construction.
We have a motion and a second. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Kyla, did you have anything?
No, but I would second that.
Okay, all right. Well, if there aren't any other comments, then all in favor of moving to those two choices, the four-season or the house, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Say no. Motion passes. How about should we talk about parking? Next. And what are our three options? Basically, the smaller lot near the street.
There was the larger lot, well, the lot sizes could be big or small in any location, but there was the one along the street, there's one internal next to the house. And then there was using the driveway with parking along the driveway.
I move that we support the parking lot along Monona Drive, which was the clear choice from the community, and I think it's the smart choice for the property as well.
I'll second that.
Is there a second?
I am in agreement, but I would like to add that I think there should be a drop off to whichever type of facility we have.
Completely agree. I'm happy to accept that amendment.
Yeah. So we do have an amendment to the, does anyone want a second Rebecca's motion for the amendment?
Sure, I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of having a drop-off space near the house, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so moving back in any case of what we decide. So moving back, does anybody have anything to say about parking options? How do you feel about having the parking lot near the street?
I would just like to continue to explore the possibility of whatever the parking lot is, that we make sure that there's flexibility in that it can also be tented for a food court, or if there was ever to be, there's just, that it's not only used for parking, but that it could also be used somewhat flexible during other events.
Like make sure it's flat.
Just for clarification, these are not approving, but what this looks like in concept is what we're giving Dan direction to
For a smaller lot near the
pursue
street.
that direction.
Yeah,
So when we move into the comprehensive plan, right now it's like 30 stalls or something. And we have 50 stalls next to the house, and we'll play around with that with the group on the size of it, based on whether it's the house versus the new building. And the square footage, that would kind of drive,
Right, because there's
number of stalls.
Yeah.
because we may want to add something in between.
Yeah.
34 and 50, whatever. Anybody have any comments about that? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Well, this is simple. Let's go.
Yeah.
next to the house.
Yeah. I guess now it gets a little more, what should we like, maybe talk about the garden or the nature-based play. I mean, some kind of, I think most people seem to like the idea of it. Yeah.
Mayor, I don't know if we want to take those one at a time, but I felt like I was hearing from the community, and I guess I would concur that we not get crazy with too many nodes. Like, I think nature-based play is a good thing, and maybe a clearer next step would be the dock, actually, as a feature. But in terms of the nodes,
I guess I think of nature-based play as separate from the nodes.
Yeah.
you do.
Yeah. Aren't
We
the
had it
nodes just
separate
little
on-
I guess I
gatherings?
thought nature-based play was one of the nodes.
No, we had it separated as a use area, and then the nodes were just small gathering areas, informal gathering areas.
Yeah,
Okay,
They could be anything from a cleared area in the woodlands to having like tree stumps to sit on or rocks to sit on. Very informal.
Yeah.
Gathering areas.
we can certainly talk about a pier or dock first, if you'd like to do that.
well, I move that we put the dock,
First of all, do we want a dock?
I move that we have a dock. I move that we have a boat dock, that extends sufficiently to be able to accommodate visitors by boat, regardless of their, and I believe that the most logical place that we decided in terms of the depth of the water or whatever was probably I can't remember which, but I think it was the one that was furthest to the left.
The
On
pier nearer the house, that's deeper water.
Nearer the house, because that's where that's where the water is.
Jake, do you have any piers in parks?
Yes,
So you're used to putting them in and taking them out?
yeah, we have a contractor that barges them in and out. The storage is,
Yeah.
but normally Little Beach is a little full of piers in the winter. I think accessibility down to the northern end where it's a little bit flatter, or we have that crush or the mulch path now would be pretty easy to pull them in and out from there.
Because otherwise, if it's up more near the house, are we talking about where the path goes down? Where the little bench sits partway down?
Yeah,
On
it's
the
probably
rocks
just
there.
a little bit north of that yet. I mean, logistically, you're somewhere
Like here,
behind. Yeah, I mean, conceptually, I think anywhere in there, once you get into.
because that is where that little senior. That's right.
Yep.
I would think also placement would have to do somewhat with where the bathrooms are too.
Yeah,
You know,
true.
the proximity to the bathrooms would be, I think, something that would be beneficial.
Right.
Yep, no, that makes, I assume that's
Someone
what,
who's been on a boat for a few hours at a time.
yeah.
At some point, that's awful nice.
Yeah. But we have a motion to put a pier in. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay. Now for the discussion, I guess we're talking about having it sort of to the, if you're standing outside the house facing the water to the left, south a little bit then, right?
Do you
What
want
are the
it to be-
criteria for the pier?
Yeah,
I think,
Yeah.
accessible.
is it accessible by boat? Is it? It's not a fishing pier. That's not what it sounds like the
Right,
motion.
it's a boating pier.
And you're thinking of a motor boating pier, right? Not something just for canoes and kayaks.
Correct.
or-
I would say that that's another whole boat, canoes and kayaks, but I'm thinking of a boating pier, and I guess I would also add to that I think that one of the things that this lake is desperate for, and that I think would really stand out, would be that the pier would also have the ability, would have the platform to be able to be accessible. Which is to say, the DNR is just recently started to put in accessible piers for instance, canoes and kayaks. There's all kinds of new technology that enable people to get in and out of the water off of the pier if you're disabled in a kayak or in a canoe, and we don't have any of that in Madison, and we should. And Monona absolutely should, if this property is going to be accessible.
How does that fit with where that would be located? Like, how do you get a disabled person from a pier up? I mean, that's a pretty big climb. Right?
But we don't know, I mean, Mary, we
If we're
don't
gonna
know
do that.
we don't know how the front of the property is gonna need to be reconnoitered or landscaped or whatever to be accessible to anybody, never mind. So I guess maybe that doesn't become part of the motion, but I guess I would say that, again, it should be a boating pier. If at all possible, that boating pier should facilitate or be accessible to people of all ages, stages, abilities. And that it should be situated, recognizing other property enhancements and the topography and the facilities, including bathrooms or something. I mean,
I would agree that, this is what we want. You figure out.
Yeah.
Right,
It's all
exactly.
the puzzle pieces,
Right,
because
right.
the pier will shift north. It'll get shallow water, but the bluff is not as high.
Right.
So there'll be a
Right.
center.
Yeah,
Right.
ground that
that's,
everything-
I'm thinking it's really high down where we're talking about
right.
it here. Jake,
have to provide an accessible pathway.
right, or a
To
little.
it.
lip.
Yeah, so it's generally, there's the guide or the law which states the slope that you have to go up, so you probably have a meandering slope getting, moving north and then switch back and coming back to the center of the property, but. So MSA is really good at.
Yeah.
Conceptual
Yeah.
design.
And
putting
when we
together.
get further on in the discussion, there are some path materials. It doesn't have to be concrete or asphalt. But we'll want to have we'll want to show a connection for the piers. That'll be concrete. And then that would be a landing point, and then however it snakes up the hill, you've got a variety of different materials that are acceptable
Okay,
based on the slope.
Jake, do you have anything to add in terms of a pier?
No, I think, if there's still a very strong use of the shallow area for boats to dock temporarily, with anchors, and I think the further south that we get it, the line of kind of where the boats ends up is well north of the house. So that I think is a good meeting spot. I don't think you want to put a pier right where there's traditional uses of sandbar, basically boating use. So I think that's kind of the best of both worlds, just looking at the boaters that just want to hang in the shallow area and swim. Then the ability to dock up and come onto the property would be beneficial as well.
I think on the diagrams, we want to show at least 6 feet wide on the walk and the pier.
Okay,
That's a little bit narrow for a pier that has a lot of people coming to it. But the pier should be a lot wider than what the sailing club has.
okay.
That's not acceptable or acceptable. Yeah.
And how long? I mean, do we, is there a kind of a standard length
The
or?
DNR has regulations on how far you can extend,
Okay.
but there's flexibility based on water level, and I think it's to get to at least 3 feet of depth. So that does give us some flexibilities on length. This, depending on the number of slips, and that's,
Right.
probably at least MSA to provide a recommendation, whatever you have will get used.
Yeah.
In that situation, if you're having, but there's still kind of a boating lane in that area too that you want to steer clear of, but it goes out
I know it's
100
shallow, really.
100
far
yards
out, right?
basically.
Yeah.
I think we need to further study the boating pier and what the options are, and what the slip capacity is, and.
But we decided we want a boating.
And I think people probably will fish off of it sometimes. If it's
Yeah.
a quiet day on a Tuesday and no one's around, I'm sure it will be used for fishing. That's
Yeah.
a great fishing spot. So I think as many activities as we can encourage from the pier, the more it's used, the better it's used.
Sunday.
And I think you can use a motor boating pier can be along with a canoe or a
Right.
kayak or a sub.
Sleeping in my sailboat, that's happened before.
They've seen a lot of different activities.
Right, and I would
would
just say as somebody who made the motion, I'm not suggesting that we're deciding that we should have slips yet either. Like, I haven't decided anyway, whether or not it should have slips. I mean, because if you have slips, that means that somebody has to manage how long people stay on a slip, how much they pay for rent, who's gonna collect the rent, how are you gonna do the, rent, all that. Maybe we go back to, we decide we go back to a water taxi once we find out what's going across the isthmus at Laws Park, because we have a water taxi that goes between us. So I don't know that we know the exact detail of what's going to happen on the dock, but I think knowing that we want a boating dock and that it needs to go out far enough to accommodate power boats as well as other boats is really what we're getting at with the plan to be adjusted by our architect based on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they can offer some alternatives.
We've
Yeah.
got good precedents around. Edgewater has a transient dock and UW has a transient
They've
dock.
got
They have finger piers.
Parking rental thing there, yeah. Okay, so Lisa, does it give you enough to get started on that? I don't know, I think we don't need to vote on that at this point.
It's the fact of we're having a boating pier. That's the
Yeah,
main thing.
at least that's one thing.
Exactly.
So do we want to talk
Having a
about,
silent craft, I make a vote that I would like a silent craft, silent sport, silent craft launching area on the north side of the property.
That's what I was just gonna ask about.
Mayor, we had a motion and a second on the dock.
Oh, on the
but not
dock.
on-
That's true. Well, what, everyone in favor of having a voting dock, say aye.
I,
And then we'll vote on more specifics when Dan brings them.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next thing is something for silent craft, did you call it? Canoes and
Island
kayaks,
sports, yeah, canoes,
or on
kayaks,
the
stand-up
flatter
paddleboard.
end.
Yeah.
Is there a motion for that? How do we need a motion to discuss? Nancy made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion about that? Have you thought of, is there a spot on this?
We were calling it a boater beach, I think, on the concept.
Yeah.
And Nancy, I don't know, people that kayak and canoe typically like getting out on a beach and not on a dock.
Correct.
I see Pebble Beach. I don't
Pebble
see.
Beach, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That was it.
But the accessibility might become a challenge if it's just a beach, so I think most of the.
Yeah.
The newer accessible launches I've seen that have usually require some degree of dock infrastructure to allow someone to get in.
Or you can put in a concrete ramp into the water.
Yeah.
Get to a point and then so you can get out of the water and up to a pass system.
Yes.
We can add accessibility to the
Yeah, we
watercraft,
should.
the
Yeah.
silent watercraft sports.
Does anyone have more other thoughts about that? I don't know that much about that type of voting, so.
You don't need much, basically,
Yeah,
You don't want a bunch of big rocks in it and that kind of thing, but it's, kind of
Roll an ankle, right, exactly.
fairly gentle and. We talked about putting in a Schluter Beach, accessible dock, and I think it's being fundraised for.
Correct.
Can you tell us, how much, what were we thinking that's gonna cost?
Those are around 20 to 25 grand. It's an easy dock system, which is a brand name of a modular floating dock and. But the accessibility part is, can be quite long. It can be 40 feet long by the time you get to the rail system to the transfer seating area. That, yeah, there's around 20-25 at this point.
At
Anybody
one
else?
time, did we talk about any type of storage for kayaks, like rental storage space?
we do have that at other parks. I don't know how you feel about that, Jake.
Well, I think the question, at least conceptually, is if you're interested in a third party vendor, i.e. like a Brittingham Boats that would be providing rentals of kayaks, SUPs, paddle boats, etc. Conceptually, if you want to show that in the plan versus having just some dedicated private rental storage of kayaks, canoes. That's certainly a revenue generator for the city. However, there's some, aesthetic issues and usability issues. Like I think we're going to be refining our system that we have in our current system based on size and length, and sometimes you get big canoes that are up high and kayaks that go down low. But it's certainly an option. I think the other question is conceptually whether you would consider having any sort of rentals available on site.
So I was just gonna say that, again, I'm just going back to my motion. I wasn't getting into a discussion about the specifics of how each of these things were gonna be programmed and by who and what kind of revenue we were gonna generate. I was just going to, do we need the feature or don't we? Because I do think that there, again, as Jake just pointed out, of course, because he knows his business. There's a million different ways you can play the kayak and canoe. I don't, at least when I made the motion, I had no intention this evening of getting into a business plan. I thought we were just focusing on
I
features.
think we're just trying to answer a few questions. people had, so.
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything else to say about?
But those would be some good details and to say
Yeah.
to address, like.
Yeah, because if it goes to a vendor situation, then you need like a little shack out there that the vendor could have their
Right.
equipment in.
And that's,
the way
we
they
don't
pay.
really have that.
We don't
in
have
any of
that
these
on the plan.
options, do we?
From an aesthetic standpoint, it's.
I think you're just, that's fine all the more. I completely agree and understand with that. It's just how detailed conceptually do you want to go? Do you just want to have a box showing store, canoe kayak storage, and then that's just a placeholder for whether it's, users renting or just show just simply conceptually the launch area, and then that gets refined and designed.
I think.
Yeah, because on the concept, we could show a rack area, and a rack could be vendor run, or it could just be personal rental.
To me, the
Yeah, when-
access, the water access is most important, and then to launch.
Right.
And how it functions is.
And to Mary Lee's point earlier, those are services we offer in other parks as well.
Yeah, but I was thinking we don't want to be duplicating services right down, Schluter Beach already has all these. Do we
Or do
want?
they do that at
It's
Birmingham
very competitive.
right over?
Yeah.
So even a rack would open up to the condos too,
Mhm.
if you're in that location.
But it seems like it's something that could just easily come in after,
Yeah.
it could be added later.
As long as
Right.
where we put it to start with,
So you have a
makes
space.
sense for
Yeah.
where you might put that, and I think that'd be something to think about, so. So is that enough for you, Dan, for
Yes.
that? Do we want to go back to the nature-based play?
There was a motion.
We,
Oh, I'm sorry, all in favor of having a place for canoes and kayaks, say aye.
I-
Opposed, motion passes. Should we talk about nature-based play next? I mean, just do some of these big things, maybe talk about paths at the next meeting or something. I do want to allow some time for Wes to talk about this other stuff, so. Is there a motion to have some type of nature-based play?
I'll move that we have some type of nature-based play.
I'll second.
Okay. Thoughts about that? I know there's a couple different options on the plan of where it might be. And there was one, the one with the parking along Monona Drive was a little closer to the parking lot. Anybody have thoughts about?
I would say not by the parking lot, where
Right.
kids are playing.
Maybe
I think an appropriate area might be like if there's an event space where you're gonna have like music or whatever, you have close proximity to where your kids are playing.
Kind of like a Schluter, when there's a beer garden there, or something, the kids are right near.
And I think we try to locate it near a facility, so if it's a house, it'll be closer to the house. If it's a new building, near
Yeah.
the new building.
Jake, do you have any thoughts about that?
I would concur with Dan on that, close to where restrooms are. As close to where events are gonna be. Somewhat central.
So probably more like the concept A than the others, which were closer to the street. Anybody else have anything else to say about that? All in favor of nature-based play, say aye. This is so simple. Why have we been meeting for a year?
So we could get to this point.
I think maybe should we talk about nodes? I see nodes in garden, maybe. I think we do want nodes. It's more a question of how many. There's some of these plants have like 6 and others have fewer.
I make a notion, we have notes, do we need to go there and then
Yeah,
discuss it?
Well, I think Jesse can help us out because of the way that the schools could use the
good
park
idea.
and the number of kids and activities.
Yeah, again, considering classroom sides are roughly around 20, you might have a teacher, special education assistant with there too. So considering that, and again, 4 sections per each grade level. So if an entire grade level comes out, we might be considering if it's 4 or 5 sections, around 100 students alone, and then a potential of another 10 adults with. I think these opportunities are great when parents are able to join as well, and things like that. So just considering that number.
That makes sense to people, like say 5 nodes accommodating 20 to 25. And is that kind of what, I have no idea what you were thinking of.
I think
in
we had
terms of
8
size.
nodes. Oh, on size.
Yeah, You think?
We were working, because Jesse had mentioned that before, on the sizes.
Okay.
I just didn't remember how many at one time, the 100 kids at one time. But the nodes are planned for about 2025.
But with 100, we'd be breaking them up.
And in each.
Rotating
Yeah,
through different stations.
Right.
And then the building too.
True.
And don't the nodes kind of come organically with your plan? I mean, with your, you could tell like, oh, this is where we're, you know, moving on to
It won't
something
look
else.
like
It'll
a
be
patio,
organic,
you know.
right?
It'll be part of the nature and landscape.
And I guess on each of the plans, there are 7
Seven.
nodes.
Yeah, that seems too many. I think 5.
5.
Good number.
Yeah, when I would just say too, that to me. If. I mean, I think that having 5 nodes is great, but I would hate to have them so spread out that we lose. Larger expanses that might be possible for larger events, for instance, beer gardens. Or somebody renting the space for a wedding or something like that, like, you know, if they're dotted throughout the property, then, and they're too broken up throughout the property, then I think it becomes more problematic in terms of the multi-use of the space overall, because they're kind of in the middle of stuff. You know what I mean? In the middle of the larger expanses.
Well, Jake, when you toured me this morning, you raised a great point about thinking culturally how different folks may want to utilize the space and utilize it for certainly different types of family gatherings or other things. So that may, at least a couple of those areas might want to be set up for a little larger use, while other ones, I mean, maybe varying the size of them a little bit would be advisable. I do know that I've certainly seen that in other places, and I know you guys have talked about that already quite a bit. So I think that would be maybe just to vary them a little bit to provide some opportunity for that, I guess.
I would think we'd want them spread out somewhat, though. I mean,
I feel like they can overlap, like if it's a big event space, that can still serve as a node.
Right.
yeah,
I think Nancy, I think what you're getting at is like, for instance, if the house stays and we have a big event space around the house, that the nodes be more towards the north end of the park and not on the north end and the south end of the park where people are cross pollinating that big area.
Yeah, I mean, I just, you know, yes, I mean, I just want to be cognizant of the fact that we will need, I assume anyway, we haven't voted on this. Maybe that's another vote, but it seems to me that we're all thinking that we would like to preserve the center part, or at least a, if not dead center, certainly somewhere in the park. I mean, we're talking about creating prairie, we're talking about creating stormwater, all these other things, and I think we've all appreciate the fact that the park has the ability to stage larger events, whether they're private events or public events, whether they're snow snake games or beer gardens or powwows or whatever it is. And so I just don't want the nodes to be in the middle of that and remove that possibility. And where they are beyond that, I want to leave it up to the landscape architect.
I think the way it looks on these plans is they're not in the middle of any of the big
Right.
open spaces. They are
Around
around
the
the
edge,
edge. So I think
Okay.
some version of what you have here, maybe with one or two fewer sounds.
I can understand the part if you have a wedding, for instance, and you had 2 nodes down here and 3 nodes up here and people are running back and forth. I can understand that.
I just question
issue, but-
having planned 2 weddings, how many people would
No,
be running?
not really.
Right.
Yeah,
I feel we're overthinking this.
yeah.
Quite I mean, I think of a wedding, it's people want to get, so there's a big party, I want to go for a walk and go to the gazebo. And so the nodes are going to be inviting you outside of those anyway. And then I'd like to point out that a big portion of this park is actually managed savanna. So there's plenty of space for five nodes.
Yeah.
Depending on how
Right.
big they are. But they should facilitate some sort of use, you know, particularly to what Jesse was speaking to. Like the council rings, you know, like that can seat 20 people. if we're, you know, if we get to talking about having an open air amphitheater, then maybe we get to the discussion of having a very huge council rink as one of the nodes, you know, which is just a circle with seating
Right.
around it. But nodes are there to attract you and not to certainly be a nuisance for an event. It's really help to kind of space you out and create a little environment for you, a little atmosphere to kind of escape to and kind of be part of the allure of the charm of the park.
Well, I think it sounds like we want nodes, we want maybe a couple fewer than we have and, but spaced out pretty much the way they are now. Is that what? And if anybody wants to see this, they all look about the same, each of these plans, they're all kind of around the edges. Nothing's in the middle of any big open space or anything. I guess there's one near a tree.
And they're placed near trails, so they're.
Yeah, which makes sense.
And that's the direction we've gone from day one is it's a fully accessible park.
Yeah. And if you are bringing groups of kids, you want them somewhat spaced apart, so you can hear what they're doing. So,
Jesse's agreeing.
okay, anything else about nodes? All in favor?
Is there a motion and a second?
I thought there was a motion.
Yeah, I motion.
Motion.
I don't know who
Doug
seconded.
I think I
And
seconded,
Doug's-
yeah.
so-
Motions to have nodes.
Yeah.
Maybe we should generate the five nodes.
Well, I want them to have the flexibility to decide what the plan calls for.
But keeping in mind what we talked about, I guess.
Yeah.
Anything else? All in favor, say aye.
I,
Opposed? Motion passes. Should we talk about vegetable and fruit garden and then move on to the facility stuff? Is that? I know a lot of people seem to question having a garden. I was kind of surprised by that.
I think it's because we call it a community garden
Right,
Yeah.
Maybe just don't call it community.
and
yeah.
because people go to, little
Where they
squares
rent
that
their
everybody
space
and some people don't like that.
I actually think that there was confusion because on the drawings, it said Ho Chunk Garden as well at some of the drawings, and so I think there was confusion as to whose garden it was gonna be. Or how it was gonna be used, or who it was gonna be used by.
I think one of the big concerns that I heard through the public survey and just personal input or whatever, conversational was maintenance of it. So they don't want it just to be an unmaintained, kind of weeded piece
Right.
of property. So I mean, right now we have an individual who is maintaining it, but they're not gonna be there forever and there's no one really taking over. Ho-Chunk didn't do anything again this year, and maybe that's just because there isn't more of a formal program. So I think that's one thing, if we do include that, we have to make sure that it's maintained and programmed and, you know,
Maybe a teaching garden,
yeah, I mean,
label it a teaching garden.
Like they used to have at Winnequa. I don't know if they still.
Well, they
have
still
and I
have
think it's
one.
possible.
Do they? Okay, so,
So I mean, I think the group just needs to decide whether that is there or not. And then you can figure out the program side of it, but. I
Yeah,
think that
I
was.
see it as more of a community, I mean, with you, Andy, I'm seeing, and Jake, I'm seeing it more as a teaching garden. I think it has potential and as a node, if you will. And as, just as a teaching garden.
although as Rebecca pointed out, there is a teaching garden at Winnequa School. That's been there for 10 years probably. And I imagine you have, I don't know if you're even involved anymore, but
Oh, no,
I'm
my
sure.
kids are older than that.
But I'm sure there are issues as time goes on. And I know there was.
It's hard enough to get people to maintain the school garden. So I think to have a teaching garden here is gonna be more
I
difficult.
hate to
than
end up having
school
the
garden.
staff to.
Well, and I think you can identify a space for it, like where it currently is,
Yeah.
for example. And worst case scenario, you just query it over
Yeah.
or something, yeah, repurpose
Right.
it, so.
And maybe make it somewhat smaller than what we've got
Yeah.
now too. And if you want to give it some thought, Jake, I think Cottage Grove is getting rid of they had their glacial
GDS,
drumlin, yeah.
I mean, it's either a partnership with a high school or Nuestra Mundo or a master gardening program
Yeah.
that a third party is coming in to offer programs that's part of the experience of the property.
Or
Yeah,
elderly
or
old nature center that doesn't have a garden. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
they may be interested in that.
yeah, I mean. Or depending on what we do with the house. I mean, I just think at this point, well, I'd like to make a motion. That we retain a garden. In the plan, retain a teaching with the intention of it being more of a educational tool. For the property and, again, what the business plan becomes of it. I don't know that we're prepared to make that decision
And
now.
not a community garden though.
Just rename it teaching garden.
Yeah.
Garden.
Yeah,
So
it's a
it's-
garden.
yeah,
It doesn't have to have a.
Right.
If we could
qualified.
have this, the
We
space
retain a
dedicated.
garden, that we retain a.
What were you saying, Tony?
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Nancy. Just, it's, again, we can just kind of, it's almost like a placeholder for it. And then
Right.
depending on what kind of programming occurs with the facility or the updated house, if the
Right.
vendors or third party, that can be used as that.
So what
Or
would be as big?
as Andy was kind of alluding to, like, exploring, the interests of the whole chunk to,
Yeah.
be part of that as well.
Sure,
It can always be changed.
exactly.
So is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
I would just say, I mean, it's entirely possible the garden might just go away too.
Right.
If nobody's really interested in doing it.
Yeah. Or we may have it for a few
Side of that
years.
coin is that might be super exciting to a potential donor who wants to fund it and figure out a way
Yeah.
to make it work. So we don't
Right.
know at this point.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
It's a placeholder.
Does anybody else have anything to say?
Is the motion to just say we're having a
Just having a
garden?
garden.
Yeah.
And we're not calling it a community garden. And we do mean vegetable, right? Or are we talking flowers?
Whatever, it'd be.
Whatever.
Garden.
Well, this is vegetable, so that's good. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Do we want to get into a fruit garden or not?
Can't that be part of gardening?
That could be part
Well,
of.
the idea with the fruit gardens was to, if you put any landscape in, any canopy trees, they would be fruit trees. Now, you don't necessarily have to maintain them, but the idea is fruits would go with the vegetables
Yeah,
or whatever.
Okay,
I think that's a great idea.
all right, well, we'll just leave it at that then. Let's move
Mary,
on.
sorry, there's just one other piece that I wanted to bring up, particularly with Dan and the architects. Because it represents a big chunk, or relatively speaking, a big chunk of the property. It was raised by several individuals who are in the know in the community, which is to say they're in the construction business and the stormwater business. That the stormwater basin that we currently have next to the property on the north is not large enough for, it's, first of all, that it's the lowest, it was suggested by more than one person that it's the lowest part of the property, and B, that it is not large enough for the area that it covers, which is frankly, it's
Yeah.
Madison.
Yeah.
It's not Monona. And so
It's Madison's water, right?
right,
Yeah.
it's Madison's water, but it's a big area. It's like 12 blocks or something. It's a pretty big area that basin takes care of. And so it was suggested to me that, at the time the basin was created, it was created the size that it was, knowing that it was too small because we didn't own the property. We didn't have anywhere to go. Now we own the property, and so what was raised to me was, why would we in the plan have a huge area devoted to stormwater runoff when for the property, essentially, when what's going on in the property, first of all, is not that much anymore. It's more natural. We're not doing a ton of hardscape, so there won't be a ton of runoff on the property itself. And B, that the stormwater area that's there is too small, so why wouldn't we want to, and I might add C, I've also heard rumor that there might be funds available.
Yeah, we've talked to the county about that, and they did say it's potentially to get a grant for that, but
For
Why don't we-
expanding, you mean expanding?
for expanding the
existing?
one that's there. I have no idea if that would do what we need here. I know in the one plan with the parking lot closer, the stormwater pond is much smaller. I don't know if that's,
Dan, is it correct that those stormwater ponds that you have on the various plans, that's for runoff on the property, right?
For the new
Only,
parking lot
is what,
pavement.
I mean, the size of those, I assume is gonna be determined by how much hardscape you put in.
yeah.
And what other mitigating measures. you might do.
And so if you look at Oldbrook Gardens, what they did on this side of the park, that new parking lot that they put in, they've got the drainage right next to it. It's a much bigger parking lot than what this would be, but it serves that parking lot in the new building that they have there. You can see it's a pretty good size. Did it, but what we would propose would look like a rain garden. You know, be planted with native species and not just did it in the ground. And it would be, you know, if you look at it that way, it's a feature in the park that
Yeah.
it's not a stormwater basin.
It's kind of, we're talking about two separate things, really, I think.
But the idea
There's a lot of
was,
ways to deal with the stormwater. You don't have to do
yeah,
a
you don't-
retention pond. You don't have to
have
do a
to do that,
detention pond. You don't have to,
Yeah.
you know, you can do.
but the idea was there was going to be new pavement on the site that doesn't exist, and we're trying to collect it for one off site.
Yeah.
Being good stewards.
Well, let's keep that in mind about the other bigger water pond or detention pond to the north there. And we know the county has told us there'd probably be grant funding available for that. And that's kind of a whole nother story here, although it's certainly, I'm sure they would love to build something on the north end of the property, but I don't know if we want to do that for the city of Madison.
Because it goes up to that piece that's for sale now too,
Right.
the other side, so they're landlocked, so they have to go.
Maybe they could buy that piece for $1 million. Okay, let's move on to, Wes has put, and last time, I think we talked a little bit about building concepts from MSA presented, and Wes has put together some pretty quite a bit of interesting information about some possibilities. So Wes, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think the June meeting was on the phone. I think I promised to put something together, and then I started putting something together.
Then you couldn't stop.
So I think a couple things. First goal for this is to try to provide some clarity on the historic tax credit issues that were coming up in June, and just try to help us understand all of that. And the way I did that is I tried to put together an example of how we could rehabilitate the house using credits, which caused me to then consult with some people and I've got a business model or delivery model in here. I don't know how much we want to go through today. I think this is the first of a couple times we might look at this, so I might just send this out after the meeting and we can dig into it again. But the point here, I think, is that this is possible. It's going to require money, and but there is a delivery model that I think this has potential. I think it advances the goals that we've talked about for the site, and so laying that out there for consideration. And I think in going through the process, I think the other thing that I think the other main point here is that as we're thinking about a rehabilitation project or a new building, there's a lot of things for us to consider. And so as I tried to enumerate those things for us as we and create potentially a roadmap for us to think about this decision, which is a big one, moving forward, and a method for doing that. So that's kind of the goal here. So first, some background stuff. And I'll just keep going here. And stop me if you have questions, but essentially when it comes to the historic tax credits, there's really two things we've been talking about, and both of these programs are administered by the Historical Society's State Historic Preservation Office, the National Register of Historic Places, which really is a process that there's a state historic preservation review board. It meets quarterly and it decides which properties get put on the register. If you're on the register, then you are eligible for these tax credits. And so there's a state and a federal credit. Therefore, income producing properties, which is why the delivery model gets a little complicated. Because how does a city take advantage of income producing tax credits? That's the question, right? So once you're on the register, then you're eligible and you can go through the process, which and really there's staff in the historic preservation office that help you through the process and consult with the National Park Service and work on all of the requirements to get those credits. So that's kind of at a high level. So Frank Ellis House, what's the status? It's a landmark in Monona, subject to local Monona landmark ordinances. In 2007, this, I guess there must have been an inquiry to the SHPO office about the building, and it was determined that the house was not eligible for the National Register at that time. We brought back representatives of SHPO in May to tour the house. We walked around it and through it, and it was, I would characterize the visit and the conclusion is if we can bring the condition of the house back to the 1894, certainly the facade, that's, bring it back to 1894 status, there's a high level of likelihood that we could be put on the register. That's kind of the first. If the answer was no way, then we wouldn't be talking about tax credits, but I think there's a possibility moving forward. You can see I not updated item 4 there. So we toured the house with Findorf. When was that, a few weeks ago? Trying to get a sense of, okay, what would it take to restore the front facade back to that condition, and which would require knocking off the addition, restoring a facade, putting in a new porch that, is essentially the same as the old porch. So we just got numbers today, an estimate in the ranges in the $500,000 plus range. So that's that's what we're looking at. I think, we want to get another estimate. I think Findorf is, well, you can look at that number. But it's a good range of magnitude for us to just think about. So finally, so if we were to go forward with that and we were successful with the National Register, then we could look at how to put together a public-private partnership that would essentially allow us to take advantage of the credits. So that's a lot to get to the starting line, but questions about the kind of the tax credits, historic preservation side of this?
I got a question.
Yeah.
How long would that public-private partnership have to be, or would that be indeterminate? Would that be in perpetuity?
It's a great question. So it's the way it's structured usually is a long-term lease of at least 50 years. However, when the tax credits are used, essentially there's a process to kind of back out of that sooner than 50 years after certain set of things happen. But it's generally a long-term public-private partnership. Any other questions?
Is there a difference between putting the structure on or creating it like a district? In terms of how it would, tax credits would apply? I know in Sun Prairie, they had in their downtown, they had several buildings that individually would have qualified, but some that didn't. But they went ahead and created they took a whole block. But now in this case, I don't know if there's any other properties besides the one we're really looking at, so I don't know if it makes a difference.
This
but-
would just be the individual structure. There's not, there's no
nothing else
system.
not around it. That's, I was just making sure.
So the facade improvements, that would include taking off the siding. And all that, that's why their estimate's so high.
And that stone in the front,
Yeah.
the 2-story and 2.
There's a whole list of
And, you know,
Yeah.
and its foundations, exactly.
Because just saying facade is really a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And so $500,000 doesn't seem that bad. It might seem like a lot of money, but when you think about what all they're talking about.
Yeah.
It's probably a really good estimate.
Yeah, just glanced at it this afternoon. But yeah, it's a lot, there are a lot of things. Okay, so then what is this? What would a public-private partnership look like? Essentially, you know, it require the city to enter into a relationship with several entities. First, we have, you know, the city would have to come up with a set of requirements, criteria. And I think that's an important point. There was a question, I think, last month about control. Really, the city's in the driver's seat here. It's, you know, what is this partnership going to accomplish? And it really gets back to what our goals are for San Damiano and what do we want out of the facility. So understanding all of those things are critical for moving forward. Then it's looking at a financial model. So it's you know, sources and uses of funds for the project, and then coming up with an operating pro forma, and then looking at creating the necessary entities and partners. So that's kind of, I modeled all of that just hypothetically. We're not going to get into all this detail, but just to show you kind of what goes into this. So I thought through, okay, what would an example be of the type of criteria that the city would have? Well, oversight and control, advancing the vision and goals we have, you know, so we have some pretty specific vision and goals that we've enumerated, and then maybe translate that into what that could mean for a facility. You know, this partnership would need to drive the opportunities for year-round community gathering, public engagement, accessibility, park usage. We could write in there, it needs to share the full history, you know, promote education, and support income generation. So, you know, layering out those goals, and sort of those being the pillars and the guideposts for everything moving forward. So what might that look like inside the house? Well, in terms of driving usage, amenities that will drag people to the location, year-round gathering. What if we took the first floor, second floor, and created a destination cafe that, you know, coffee, light fare, wine and beer in the evening. Could be on the first floor, it could be on the second floor, it could create some pretty unique spaces for people to come in and gather overlooking the lake. It could be a space that's essentially leased to an operator, and that would be part of the income generation part of the puzzle. We'd have to create a catering kitchen on the first. A catering kitchen would kind of be in conjunction with the restaurant, but that could support events of a number of sizes. You could, on the first and second floor, you know, we've talked about this thing before, you know, do displays, images, art, exhibits, you know, share history. The house has been significantly modified in a lot of spaces. And so in those areas, you might try to think about repurposing space, creating that, you know, event or education programming space where you could fit 100 people, maybe use as part of the house, push and do an addition. So there's probably some new construction here involved too. And then what do you do with the third floor? Well, maybe that's turns into an additional leased space where you can generate some revenue. But maybe as we talk about, you know, how the entire park's going to be operated in the future, there's a group that's going to need office space on site who's running the events, who's operating these things. So that could make sense. Accessibility, we've talked about needing to add an elevator. So here's an example set of what might go into the facility program, but at least a starting point to think about, okay, well, what the heck would that cost? So, you know, and going through sources and uses, thinking through everything from the archaeological consulting we might need to do for a new build to that front addition, or removing the front addition, which I underestimated here. The construction design fees, FF&E legal fees is a big chunk. You get to a cost that, I mean, you're above $8 million here. And then if you're to think through what out of all those costs, what's eligible for the tax credits, it's not everything, but some of those costs, you apply the 40%, it's about $2.4 million of tax credits you could contribute to the 8 million. And that, you know, if you just down at the bottom, Dan, using some of your figures, you know, square footage estimates, it's, you know, 9,200 square feet of adaptive reuse plus they're in 1,500 square feet of new construction. So that's kind of what this is modeled. I looked at a, you know, operating pro forma, won't go through this, but thinking through, you know, what are all the costs to operate this house, the internet security, pest control, sprinklers, you know, crash, all, you know, and I stole a lot of this from another model that someone shared with me. But, you know, let's just imagine $68,000 a year just to pay for the facility alone. Well, based on what I think is achievable through, you know, rental income through a cafe, rental of the office space on the third floor, you got a break even model here, at least, I think. And that doesn't even get into other activities like event rentals and that. So that kind of shows, you know, an example pro forma. Then you get into sort of how to structure this, and this gets into the long-term lease. So this is how it would work, and maybe it makes more sense to jump to an example. You're familiar with the Stensland House downtown Madison. This was actually a building that was picked it up and they moved it down the street, and then they did an adaptive reuse, and the Bethel Lutheran Church owned it. So it's a very similar structure, and that's actually what we used to model this. So the church became the managing member of a new LLC, which then partnered with a developer and a bank to get this project done. So the only difference for us could be that there's a long-term lease here with the city, but you already have a partner organization that would be contributing much of the capital to this type of project. So friends or a different 501c3 could become the managing member of an LLC that would then partner with the developer. An investor member likely could be a bank. And then obviously tenants would be providing the cash flow, and that's the type of structure that you would need to deliver the project. The developer is bringing much of the expertise to the table in terms of how to, you know, the design, the construction, the doing this, you know, according to the National Park Service standards. So everyone kind of has their expertise, their capabilities they're bringing to the table. And again, I won't go through all this, I'll send this out, but essentially it's a group of entities that are aligned around the purpose. And I looked through some of the actual agreements between those organizations in the Stenson House example. It's so specific when it comes to, well, what is this new LLC? Well, it exists for these purposes, right? And it's only to do these things according to the goals that have been agreed on. And there's a extensive operating agreement that really guides the entire delivery model. So it's a series of agreements, you know, between the city, the Friends, the city and a new LLC, the operating agreement, and so on and so forth. So an example of how the credits could be used, obviously it's not a small price tag, but in terms of, you know, what you could achieve for raising $6 million, taking advantage of tax credits and achieving a destination cafe, the event space, and a pretty one-of-a-kind location could be pretty compelling to donors, I think. So a lot I went through very quickly, but I think the point here is trying to show all of these different inputs into our decision and thinking through, you know, the other thing we didn't talk about is the archaeological, you know, issues we may face, right? We don't know when we start digging what we're going to find. And I think that's another consideration when it comes to, I think you put the new build where we thought the tennis courts were, right?
In that area.
But still, you know, you don't know. So I mean, there's a certain amount of risk that we have in terms of like, where do you dig a shovel, start digging? And probably would have to stop at that point. But, you know, in terms of us moving forward, I think, you know, for that example, you know, I thought through all of these different things. You know, what would we be doing in the facility? What, you know, cost estimating, what would it cost to operate? How do we deliver it? You know, what income is it generating? Donor, you know, the donor appeal. That's kind of, and I think that's what we need to do for a new building too, is to, and probably for us, our next step is to get alignment around what's the facility program and functions, what do we need to achieve in a facility? And then we make sure that we're, you know, as we start analyzing both options, we're trying to achieve those functions and that program. And then we're coming up with some real figures here when it comes to the cost to deliver the project, and then start thinking through some of these questions like how are we operating this thing, roles, responsibilities, because as we're talking about, you know, raising $6 million for a rehabilitation project, or we're talking about raising, and I think a new building, if we try to achieve some of the same things, it's gonna be could be $5 or $6 million in itself, you know.
I think that's why the last one that I brought last time was about 5 million.
And that was without a catering kitchen.
And the other thing to think about too is the sizing and the programming, because the house is big. And if you can program it, that might mean more revenue. But if it's hard to program, then do you only use half of it? And then what happens to the other half? It deteriorates. It's hard to maintain a vacated space. So you have to weigh that in there too. What do we actually want to program? Do we want to program 4,000 square feet or 9,000 square feet? There's a big difference there.
And with a new build, or if we're building just an event space, is it sitting there?
Yeah, so not used.
But if you have a larger space that has you know, someone else operating a piece of it, and it's that function fits our goals, is that I don't know, those are trade-offs, right?
And the main consideration with the tax credit or let's go through all that is it has to generate tax dollars. And that's where you have to have
That's why it's a
developer,
policy.
you have to have that model. And so you're going to be in this long-term relationship, and what's your comfort level there on that side of the equation? It's a big decision.
Yeah, it is.
What's as a percent, how much, assuming just, you know, to guess the numbers, how much of the tax credits do you think could actually would be part of the capital stack for the projects?
So it's, you know, the credit is 20% state, 20% federal, but we could probably only get 87% of it.
Good.
Because someone's gonna look at this, invest, and there's a net present value to that.
Right, absolutely,
So it's
yeah.
about 87%.
That's where you were saying on the model that you ran, it was 2.4 of the total.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mayor, bullet more.
Nancy?
Yeah, I would just say to Dan's point, around a long-term relationship. Regardless, we just made a decision, we're gonna have a facility. Whether it's the old building or whether it's a new building, and as someone who spent 11 years of her life running an event facility in Chicago, a historic event facility in Chicago. I can just tell you that this is not the same as renting park shelters. This would require a property manager.
Right.
And so we're gonna be in that long-term relationship with somebody regardless of the facility that we have.
Yep.
You know, if you're, and whether you're, because whether it's the schools that are coming in, or whether it's a wedding that's coming in, or whether it's a community group that's renting the facility, there has to be somebody there that's taking care of setups, tear downs, cleaning, you know, booking, catering arrangements, et cetera, et cetera. So it's So regardless of which facility, you know, I think there's gonna need to be a partnership. And, and I think that there is, just in terms of the sort of examples, I think that there's several there's value in my view of having something like a cafe, especially if it was a cafe that was consistent with the property's history. Like, you know, an indigenous cafe or a farm to table cafe. Something, you know, because it would lessen the pressure for everyone, whether it's Parks and Rec or Friends of, or anybody else, to program the space all the time, which I think we have to be realistic. I mean, our Parks and Rec department is over the top, over the moon, and I mean that in every positive way I can possibly say, Jake, just so you're hearing me, with the amount of programming, you know, that they do in this community. I mean, it just blows my mind it blows all of our minds every time I turn around, you know, the amount of programming that we do for people of, you know, of all ages, stages, whatever. But it just keeps expanding, and, you know, and we act like we can just keep expanding. And so I just, you know, the amount of it, as I said, if we had something that was there on a daily basis, operated by somebody else, property manager, it would lessen the need for everybody else to be constantly be programming the space. Second, I think as our police and fire department have said, having something permanent there, whether including rental of office space or rental of art studios or whatever it is on the second or third floor, I think would enhance the security on the site. You know, and third, I think it would really establish the site as a destination a lake destination that we know it needs to be from a fundraising standpoint. You know, I mean, I'm a gigantic fan of Lake Farm Park. And I have to say, it drives me absolutely crazy every time I go over there, because I go over there and I wholeheartedly think the, you know, Looney Center is fantastic, but it sits empty. Like it's a ghost town. Like after I take a long hike there, I want to go and have a beverage or have a little nosh while I'm on this beautiful park, and there's no place to go. Like, so I would just say that you know, regardless of what we end up with a model, I think what Wes has laid out here is a good model to start with, and good fodder for thinking. And I think it really applies whether we're doing a new facility or whether we're restoring the historic house.
I have a little concern about office space. I mean, that was sort of, everybody threw office space at an area now. And as we know, office space is, I mean, in real estate, we're talking about, we're going to have a huge glut of office space. You know, what I see as a need, you know, is who needs office space is our parks department, you know, whether that third department is department there. I mean, to me, that makes more sense than maybe on a, you know, tax wise, or, you know, for the community too, if that becomes, but I just hate for everybody to say, oh, it'll just be office space, because office space is.
I would say that I think smaller individual offices have a better shot of getting filled up than
And the big building.
assuming somebody bring in 20 people for a
Yeah.
whole office. I do think there is a market for just smaller individual offices. Now, still, it will take a while. It's still a tough market, absolutely. Don't disagree with that one bit, but I do think there's a little bit more opportunity, some more flexibility in terms of if it was targeted toward more smaller uses, but then that also means more leases to manage, more tenants to manage, more. There is a downside to that. The ideal, I think, from an income standpoint, is if you had one person come in, take the top 2 floors, here's your rent check every month.
Yeah.
You're good.
And I'm not necessarily advocating for
Yeah.
all of the pieces, but I think
Right.
to me, that's what we should be talking about. It's like,
I agree.
and what type of space would support the mission of that we have, right? And the vision. So it may not be the, I mean, parks make sense. What annual, I mean, it could be the future organization that's raising funds and operating events on site. You know, it could be part of the, who knows, or it could be something totally different.
But it could be either facility though. It could be the new building or the, so that's, I think you'll get there with the programming. But for the master plan, that it's more of how big do you want to deal with? And then when you get past the master plan, I think it'll be up to the city or this group to write a really strong program. Because you look at Devil's Lake, that's a mistake. The vendors got in and the vendors made a ton of money. Now the vendors operate everything that's down along the beach and they're building buildings everywhere. And the state's like, well, you know, they can't get their hands on it because the vendors got millions of dollars. So you have to write a really strong program because you'll get a developer in there. And next thing you know, they're doing all kinds of stuff on your property as the city. That's the next step. When you go in the direction that you want to go, the size of facility and the types of programs you think that fit in the site, it's only 10 acres, so it's got a
Right.
limited scope. And but then once you get past the master plan, then think about, okay, these are gonna be the lines in the sand. And this is as far as our private partner is gonna be able to go. Or you can, with what they have.
Which I think is what you were talking about, Wes, with those model contracts, would be really.
Yeah, to hold their feet to the fire. Okay, this is it. This is what we want. This facility.
Do you have something, Doug?
Yeah, I was just, it seems to me that if we do a new structure, new 4-season shelter event space, that's gonna be a lot simpler to operate. That's not dissimilar from what our Parks Department already does. Not that they wouldn't have the staff to do it, so, and right now, certainly. I don't know what your thoughts are. I mean, parks, they do the ice rink and,
Yeah, I mean, staffing certainly has to be considered. The challenge with either of these is the idea of having a private business or rented out facility with, I think, the vision of this committee's goals on parking lot size. You're way far off right now. So if you put 4 or 5 different businesses in, there's our own city requirements on a number of parking spaces that need to be available. They're gonna want in a contractual arrangement, make sure that they have adequate on-site parking that make the business plan feasible. I do think there's certainly either option, if you are losing some local control through, your elected officials or through this long-term contractual arrangement. I think in a new facility, there's an opportunity to have a little bit of both. If you're talking about a third party section of a new facility that is operated by a private vendor for like food and sales, and we've seen those type of lease agreements where they manage the events, private events but you still control basically day-to-day access to the rest of the facility. So I think in a new facility, certainly there's an opportunity to do that. With the existing, house, that would all have to be pretty much not run through parks at all.
There's something that you mentioned, Wes, that we may put a shovel in the ground and really we can't build a new facility somewhere. It's still a big unknown, so to me, that just alleviates that massive unknown right off the bat, like we can proceed with the project. We could all sit here and talk circles around going to the facility, but I almost myself back when there and it's like, how we missed this, and then it's all.
Although even if we're gonna add on to one side of it, but still have some of that issue.
We could, true. But to that point, it also falls into the sustainability model of like, the most sustainable is to keep what we have.
Correct.
And then we already know it's got a good foundation, the house has got good bones. There's no lack of need for real estate for the city itself to use office space for, say, parks and things like that. So You know, that 9,000 square feet is a lot to fill, but there is some need there for that. And what Wes was saying, it's a really compelling option because this is really a destination that we're trying to create here. So there's a lot of possible interest to have people with that. We do silence critics that are wanting this to be a self-sustaining business model without just draining the taxpayer dollar in that regard. And the last thing I'll say about that is, like, you know, this is also being built here in Madison, Wisconsin, not in the southwest of the United States, where you have water issues and possible migratory issues with the human scale as the years progress 10, 20, 30, 40 years on the line. So to me, it just seems like Winona will be a destination overall and long term, which makes this discussion quite compelling.
Yeah, I think the office space discussion is a good one. But I think we can figure out the right uses of the facility. I think the main point I was trying to show is that we can deliver this project. And I think getting back to new building or this building, how are we paying for it?
Right.
And I think we can't lose sight of the destination appeal and the uniqueness that a rehab project could provide. If, assuming there's the right set of donors out there.
And I think it was really good that you included expansion on the first floor, because if the first floor is 3,000 square feet, that's not really big enough to do like a restaurant or type of weather. It's got to be expanded.
Nancy?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I mean, I know that the notion of for Monona anyway. I know sort of the notion of trying on a long-term partnership with someone is a little bit daunting for the city of Monona, but I would just say that there's beyond the model that Wes raised in this document, there's many models. And in fact, if you Googled public-private partnerships in Madison parks, there's a gigantic article where the director of Parks and Rec in Madison talks about the fact that public-private partnerships is the way of the future, because the city of Madison can't possibly be, managing everything that they need to manage at the level they do. Breeze Stevens Field is a public-private partnership. Warner Park and the Duck Pond is a public-private partnership. In Dane County, there's a park called Silverwood that's a public-private partnership between the Friends of Silverwood Park. It's a new close to 300 acre park. If you haven't been there, it's stunning. It's an old farm with an old farmhouse, and the old farmhouse is the master plan includes the old farmhouse being transformed into an event space that the Friends would be responsible for, and the county would not be. And again, so there are partnerships, there are models out there. And not to mention Sun Prairie and, a racetrack, which is, but it's another whole matter. But I'm just saying, I know it, and Mayor, I think you mentioned Garver, saying something like the city of Madison didn't have anything to do with Garver anymore, and that's not true either. That's a public-private.
I haven't said anything about Garver, but I think it's a different kind of a space, certainly.
It's a different space, but again, it's owned by Madison, and Baum is on a 99-year lease. Because Madison didn't want to get into the business of creating an event space,
I think Aldo Leopold maybe a better case study for us,
absolutely.
because it's.
Which we have a partnership with, yeah.
That's right. And it's
the
a
city
long-term partnership.
dictated what needed to happen there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's saying the city's against a partnership. It's more a question of what would it look like? How does it fit with what we've committed to with the county?
Totally.
Yeah, no.
that kind of thing,
And
so.
I'm not saying that we're against it. I'm just saying, to me, it feels a little daunting. So it's helpful for you to think
It's
about
a
other
big
examples.
decision, absolutely.
Yeah.
Things say it feels daunting, and it feels like a little bit like control, and I'm just saying there are other examples.
Yeah.
It can be done. We have our own example on Aldo Leopold. And by the way, Aldo Leopold also, very specifically says they agreed, and the city could do the same, we're only gonna do X number of weddings a year, or we're only gonna do X number of big events a year. Because we want to keep the space otherwise, utilized as a public park. So anyway, I think this all offers great fodder, and I just want to extend my thanks to Wes for putting it together. It's no small feat.
Yeah, it's obviously.
You can
took a
see the
lot of
work that you
time.
put into that. We appreciate it.
Yes, no. I appreciate that, and I think Wes will share it,
Yeah,
or send it to Jake so he can
Okay.
share it with everyone, and I think we'll take a closer look at it in the next few weeks and talk about it.
I just think we should keep the discussion moving because.
Yeah.
If, at least from a fundraising perspective, knowing what we want to accomplish, even if we get to the point of there's still two options and we could be. Chopping two options for a little bit, but if as long as they're the right two options and our
Right.
cost estimates are on target, then we're gonna have some really good discussions and maybe. With the funding available could help us make a decision.
Right, and I mean, like we said, if somebody comes in with $5 million, wanting to do one thing, that'll make a big difference in our decision probably.
And how does that work for coming up with a finished master plan with a non-decision about location?
That's hard because the buildings are in two different places.
Correct.
And
So what are we
and
looking
the
at?
two different, and the places that the buildings sit are the event space, the outdoor open space.
Correct. So are we looking at two separate final master plans?
Right.
That's what it sounds like, unless you want to carry the plan. Just keep one in your back pocket and carry a master plan through, do it that way too, but. And not spend time developing two separate final plans.
Because some of the amenities certainly would change
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
location of a new building size and scope.
Really everything would, because their buildings are in two
Correct.
opposite places.
Could you, at a minimum, give us some revised numbers of what you gave us last time to include a catering kitchen and I would think if we're gonna have even a new facility, we're gonna want some kind of coffee shop or something to bring in.
So
So
Alexis and I looked at that Lapham footprint. And that cost, I can't remember what it was, but it was under 5 million.
And I think construction costs were estimated like 3.5, like. They were still finishing fundraising, so I don't know if they've issued contracts or.
And she felt that the kitchen would fit in one of those rooms that they had in there, and it wouldn't affect the cost of that much at all. It's just buying the
equipment,
And I think did I break down the equipment and the number that I gave you? That was something that she talked to me about. I can't remember what it was.
I
cost
don't see,
For the ovens and
no.
stoves.
5,000 square feet at for.
And also, if we're gonna use one of the rooms for the kitchen, then does that leave us enough space for the event space that we want? I don't know.
Well, we can look at, well, the square footage of the Lapham building, because we talked about 100 people one time, and that the Lapham building was big enough to support 100 people in that big room.
And they
That's
had
what
a
Alexis
kitchen
was saying, yeah.
too.
Well, they had a second breakout room. And Alexis said that the kitchen could fit in that breakout room.
Okay.
Whereas, if this new facility has just one big room, then it would work. But if you want to start breaking it down, with smaller rooms too, then it'd be a bigger building.
Right, well, but will we need some kind of an office in there? For someone to manage,
I think that
we
building
need
has
to
an
think
office
about that kind of thing, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that footprint had an office in it. But we were taking the small breakout room
Okay,
as the kitchen.
Yeah, so I would ask Alder Wood and Alder Moore, I mean, I guess if I was going to be taking something to you guys at council. I don't want to see an apples to apples
yeah,
comparison.
Right.
From either cost or amenity standpoint. For each idea, I mean, you can still come up with. Committee is recommending X. But by the way, here was why.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's premature to say that we're gonna have two. So, let's say we're gonna do, but the final product would say, well, we would be okay with doing either one of these, I mean. To me, I think maybe we could at least maybe pick a preference.
Yeah.
And if that preference turns out. Whether it's, because it's a new facility and archaeological remains and you can't, well, I mean, then we've already torn down the house, then we're really in a spot, so. Anyway, I think. I don't know. I think we could come up with a preferred alternative and still, as somebody said, have the other one in our pocket.
Do you want to approach council with building ideas?
No.
No.
No, I mean, I'm not in any way, shape or form, dissing my colleagues and saying that. I guess what I would say is that I mean, I understand that it's ultimately the city's typically it is the city's responsibility to approve or not approve a master plan for this parcel. But this is not typical. The city is not paying for this. The city has.
But the city is going to approve the master plan,
Right.
not the Friends. That's been part of the deal all along.
Right, I understand that, Mary, but the city needs to understand that they need to give the Friends a master plan that is fundable. We have to
Yeah,
go out
we
and
get that.
fundraise the money, and so if the city approves a plan that's not, that we can't go out and raise money, so it has to, in other words, the partnership has to remain.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, if we can't go out and sell, if it ends up being a plan that is not sellable, is not fundable, then it's a lose-lose proposition for both of us. And so it is different than other scenarios where it's a matter of the council is, yes, the council is approving the plan and the Park and Rec board is gonna look at the plan, but the factor of who has to fund the plan, which is to say private philanthropists, has to always, that
Right.
always has to be, we have to be cognizant of that. It's different. It's different.
But ultimately, it will be a council decision. I get what you're saying, and I agree that, but that's the agreement, so, and I don't think council is gonna wanna approve something that isn't going to be fungible, so, I think,
How different would option, if you had option A and option B? How much difference would there be for the non-facility elements? Where the paths are drawn? Perhaps where the nodes are?
The large gathering open space,
That's the.
because the buildings sit on,
So
each
either
plan
gonna be-
sit on those open spaces.
yeah,
And the thing that I was gonna ask, and then Andy slept the room, but last meeting, he talked about having a bike path come through the site and out where that garage is at. We haven't even talked about that. That's not on any of the plans right now.
no, and that's kind of a work in progress thing, so we're not gonna talk about that.
Okay.
But that is something that
You don't
may
want to put it on.
come up at some point.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I think, we're kind of past our ending time here. Does anybody have anything more right now? Wes, did you have anything more? Any more questions for Wes? At this point, we'll send you, all of you, the presentation and, talk more next time and, might have some more information by then too. I am not going to be at the next meeting, but Andy will be here, so.
This kind of seems like an important question though for you.
The two plans.
Well, one
Yeah, one
or
or
two.
two. Well, what I'm hearing is council's going to approve a plan. And what happens if we take two plans to council?
I don't want to take two plans.
Yeah, I know.
So we're not going to give them a choice, I don't
And
think.
so,
No.
yeah, that's what I was hearing. There's not going to be two plans at the end of the day. Because it would be too much on council to say, oh, well, we approve these two plans.
I think that's the expectation is that's what we're gonna do. It's big,
Right.
at least have a preferred.
We already have a plan B,
Yeah.
just de facto discussion, right? So
Right.
you could
Right.
put that together in a relatively short amount of time or.
And that's the thing, I was gonna say, well, we could do two plans, I would ask for more money
Right.
on our fees. But we could leave it at one plan, and then in a year or so from now, if something else happens. Then we could come back and switch out the other plan, you know, the basis is
Because the
there.
bulk of it's gonna be.
So
the
you gotta
same.
get ready
Yeah.
for
Right.
You gotta get to
Yeah.
the preferred plan.
Yeah.
I guess at some point, I would like to see how the house could be modernized. So it could, you know, so we could keep the facade and yet maybe the back towards the lake could be something cool and modern and be able to do what we needed to do now and in the future and stuff like that. And I guess that would be an interesting, you know, almost blend the new and the old, you know.
This would assume.
Right.
Right.
And
Would
those
be
costs,
something
nice to have
cool
an
and,
image.
you know, what,
and those costs that Alexis gave us that Westwood's using, that's what Quinn Evans has done with old buildings. So, you know, you see part of it and it looks like a beautiful old house. And then on the backside, there's this modern piece, it's all glass or something.
So can she do a concept?
yeah, can we see a
No,
few of
one-
those ideas?
Yeah, but one thing Jake mentioned this morning, we took Neil through. That there's a DNR, I mean, I don't think we're gonna be able to put something off the back, it's probably gonna
Oh,
be the
because of
side, the
setback from the
setback,
lake, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So we're already at 75 feet,
That isn't,
pretty darn close, yeah.
yeah, you can't.
I also don't think
There's
it's
that.
in Dan's purview or MSA's purview to like give us a bunch of concepts either.
No,
We aren't
but-
paying for that.
Right, I
I
agree.
can get examples.
Right,
from Quinn
yeah.
Evans.
Yeah.
Of buildings, right,
What
right,
would be a great
not
idea.
drawing it, but
That'd
just
be great,
examples. of
yeah.
something better.
just to get, just to.
Yeah, that you can see how there's an old piece and there's a new piece,
Yeah.
and it all blends together. We just finished Carnegie Library in Baraboo with Quinn Evans. The old Carnegie sits here and the brand new building's right next to it. It looks brand new and modern, but it has pieces of the building that are shaped like the old Carnegie. And that's the thought behind it. You don't stick this albatross to the side of it. That are like,
Right,
oh my God, they
right.
put this blue building on this green building.
Mhm.
No, it blends, but it's modern. It's- Looks today.
Any football fans, just go look at Soldier Field. Obviously, I'm biased.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a few weeks ago, it was terrible.
Oh,
I think the best thing we can do is give you the most accurate list of functions that we want in both.
That's probably next to
Yeah.
the functions, maybe that's our next
Then we can
step.
actually have a real cost for,
Okay,
Think about house function or facility
Yeah.
functions, right?
Because-
what do you want the structure to actually do?
Yeah,
Be
because
able to do,
the
yeah.
400 or 800, whatever square foot cost that Alexis gave us was, if you walked inside that house, it would be a new facility on the inside.
Yeah,
You know, it wouldn't look like the house that's there today.
yeah, so it's easily.
so why don't we all be thinking about
Yeah.
what functions you want to see, and it's kind of the programming, really. For next time, and we'll let Andy lead that discussion. So,
Volunteer, that's right.
I have to get to that concert. So I'm supposed to speak
I move
at
to
11,
adjourn.
So,
Second.
all in favor, say aye.
I think we got a lot done.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thanks for that presentation.
Yeah,
Good job, everybody. Thank
So
you.
helpful. Very, very.